Hey everybody, today we're messing with corn. Welcome to our bubble. My name is Katie and today we are dealing with 4 dozen ears of corn. We will be making corn relish and canning it, and we will be freezing what corn is left. Right now, as I shuck the corn, I am pulling off the old dried silks on the top and preserving all the fresh new silks under the husk. This is because we are going to put them out back to dry everything to make corn tea later. Corn tea is thought to be really good for your urinary tract. And in Native American cultures and the Chinese culture today, they still use corn silk tea to help with UTIs or urinary tract infections. Asparagus and of course cranberries and cranberry products are great for UTIs as well. So now that our corn silks are all neatly laid out, we're going to put them out back so that they can be in the sun all day to dry. It only took around 6 hours for them to dry. And then back inside, we need to take all of the corn off of the cobs. I'm using this handy little tool from Pampered Chef. Not sponsored, by the way. I have had this tool in my drawer for 20 years and never knew what it was for. I gotta say, I think a knife works just as well, if not better. I did manage to kind of fling corn all over the place. You're probably wondering why I'm doing this in a chair. And it's because I am not very tall, and it would be very hard on me to try and do this on the counter or on the island. So putting my bowl a little lower helps me out considerably. We are using the recipe that is in the Ball Blue Book for canning. It calls for 2 quarts of cut cooked corn, or about 18 ears. I did end up using around 25 ears because these ears aren't great big. They did come from a neighbor of mine down the road. I do not grow corn because the raccoons manage to eat all of it. You have to grow a field of corn to make sure that you get some and the raccoons get some. Because they'll leave you with nothing. Now, 1 quart is equal to 4 cups. So we're trying to get in around 8 cups of corn. And actually, I'm doing about 10 cups of corn because the Ball Blue Book calls for a head of cabbage to go in their relish, and I don't want to put a head of cabbage in my relish. I've never had corn relish with cabbage in it, and no sense in starting now, right? I did have to take a minute to clean up the floor from all the little corn kernels that fell all over the place. Didn't quite make it in the bowl. Now that our mess is cleaned up, we're going to start making our corn relish. We are going to use about 1.5 cups of green pepper and 1.5 cups of red pepper. I do cut around the outsides of my pepper. A lot of people do not want to use the pith of the pepper, which is this part I'm pointing out, the white part. Sometimes it can be bitter compared to the rest of your pepper, so just kind of best to leave it out in a recipe like this. We are adding a little more peppers than the recipe calls for because, like I said, the recipe calls for a head of cabbage and I am not using that. So normally we would put in 1 cup of peppers of each, but we're doing 1.5 cups. Everything needs to go into our pot because the mixture does have to be cooked. We're adding our around 10 cups of corn, And then we are adding a whole white onion. Normally I use red onions, but red onions tend to bleed the red out. So I did buy a couple of white onions to use in our relish. Now that our onions are being put in, it's time to add some of our liquid. So our recipe calls for 1 quart of vinegar. Just remember, 1 quart equals 4 cups. So I'm using all the apple cider vinegar that we had. I do like to use apple cider vinegar and stuff like this. I just think it adds more nutrition and it adds a lot more flavor than just using regular vinegar. But we are going to have to substitute half of our vinegar with just regular white distilled vinegar, and that's okay. We still get the added nutritional bonus from the apple cider vinegar that was added. After adding everything in, we're going to give it just a quick stir, because we're not done. We still need to add our spices. We're going to turn our heat on about medium so things can start heating up. So now we need 2 tablespoons of mustard seed. And then we need a tablespoon of turmeric. I do love turmeric. It is wonderful for inflammation, and it will help give our relish kind of that yellowy color. Next up, we're adding a couple of squirts of mustard because our recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of dried mustard, and I don't have dried mustard, so we're just adding about a teaspoon of just regular mustard. And then we need a cup of sugar to give us that sweet, relishy flavor. And an additional cup of water. Now we want to give everything a good stir, so to make sure that everything is well distributed throughout our entire pan. Be sure to get down at the bottom where all your peppers and stuff are and bring them up to the top. Now we can't forget a little bit of salt, bring out all those flavors, so we're adding around a tablespoon of salt. And then give everything another stir, of course. And then we're going to turn our heat up to almost high because we want everything to come to a boil. While we're waiting on our relish to boil, we're going to go on and put around 2 inches of water into our hot water bath canner. You do want to keep an eye on your relish mixture. It won't take it too long to come to a boil. And when it does start to boil, you won't have big bubbles like you normally would water. It will actually look more like it's starting to kind of foam up. Once it starts boiling, you need to turn your temperature back down to a lower heat and let it simmer for around 20 minutes, just to make sure all of those flavors are incorporated together. Now that our 2 inches of water is in our pot, we're going to place it on the stove and get our jars out ready to be filled. I am filling half-pint jars because a pint is just a lot of relish all at once. So I do put my jars in the dishwasher to heat and sanitize them and wash them at the same time. But when they come out, they're really hot. When filling our half-pint jars, I do try to start with the vegetables first and then add my liquid after. If I just scoop it out all willy-nilly and dump it into the jar, by the time I get to the bottom, I don't hardly have any juice left. So making sure that the bulk of your relish gets in before adding a lot of your juice really tends to help with that and even things out. You do want to fill your jars until they are 3/4 of the way full, or leave a 1/4 inch of headspace in the top. Now I'm adding some liquid back to them. Once all of our jars are full, don't forget to take some kind of wooden spoon or stick. I'm using a single chopstick here to make sure that I get out all of my air bubbles. Something else we need to do is to make sure that we wipe off all of our rims. Air bubbles, or if there's any moisture or debris on the rim of your jar, it can cause you to not get a good seal, and it could cause your jar to crack, and we don't want that. I did also put my rings in the dishwasher to heat them up as well. So I'm having to wipe off any moisture from the inside of the ring. If that moisture were to stay in there, it could start boiling, and it could also crack your jar. Now that our jars are full, we're going to put our lid on top of our canner and turn our heat up to high. When it starts boiling, you will be able to hear and see it. Our jars do need to process for around 10 minutes. That's the one thing I love about water bath canning, is that it just doesn't take very long, and it's not as noisy as pressure canning. Normally we would have to pressure can corn, but you do not need to pressure can with the relish, because the vinegar raises our acidity level. Boy, these look good. I can't wait to try one, but they do need to sit in our jars for at least a couple of weeks before you open them, just so all of our flavors mesh together. Now that all of our jars are done, I am going to freeze the rest of the corn, because there's not a whole lot left. And we really don't eat a whole lot of corn as a side. It is quite a heavy starch, and I would prefer a potato or rice or something like that over corn. Normally, if I freeze corn, most of it goes into soups, or if I choose to make a salsa with corn in it. What was really nice is none of our jars in the canning process bubbled over any liquid into our canning water. So I am able to just take these ears of corn and put them in the water that we already have that's really hot for the blanching process. So we'll let the corn sit in the hot water for a couple of minutes, and then we are going to pull it out and put it in ice cold water to stop the cooking process before we throw it in freezer bags. Let everybody sit in the cold water for a minute, and then I am pouring some more cold water in, just to make sure that all of our ears have cooled down properly. Now that everybody's nice and cool, it's time to dry them off on either a dish towel or paper towels. Drying off your ears of corn before putting them in your plastic bag helps to prevent with freezer burn, and to make sure that your corn doesn't stick together too badly. Once you've got your corn bagged up, don't forget, air is our enemy. So we want to try and get as much air out of the bag as possible. If you have a food saver, good for you. Use that. I do not. We have a straw and we're going to suck as much air out of the bag as possible. I've been doing this method for years, and to be honest, it works pretty well. I don't have too much of a problem with freezer burn. It's just trying to get out as much of that air as you possibly can. Now that our relish is made and canned and our extra corn is being prepped and put into the freezer, it has been several hours. So it's time to go out and collect our corn silks. The corn silks dried really quick out in the sunshine. I was thrilled. Look, it's like a carpet, and I just mushed it up and stuffed it down into our jar. One thing you do want to look for while gathering up your silks, if you're letting them dry outside, is make sure no critters have weaseled their way down in there, because we don't want those in our jar. Also, pretty important with all of your dried goods is to make sure that you throw in a silica pack. That way it absorbs any extra moisture that might be down in your jar or may get in later just through a little bit of air. Just helps keep everything a little bit fresher. Thanks to everyone for hanging out with me again today, and I really hope to see you on the next one. Bye.